Mystery of Ignis, Chapter 1. The first signs of trouble with the electrical system began 2 nights ago en route from Pyro 4. It was unlike anything I had experienced in the past. One of the power generators surged, sending a massive spike of energy coursing through the ship. Engineering panel lit up for a quick second, warning me. I wasn't in the pilot's seat at the time, and by the time I got there it was too late. The generator and one of the distributors were fried. The pyro system was unstable. Its old dying star spewed unpredictable solar flares. Without powerful military-grade shielding, the ship was at mercy of its chaotic bursts. I hoped for a quick diagnostic and a simple repair job before heading back to Stanton. For that, I needed somewhere quiet and remote. Ignis fit the bill. Desolate, with nothing but a weather research station and a small drone repair facility. Far from the safety of colonized space and hopefully far enough from the pirates who prowled the pyro system. High risk, high reward, I thought to myself, the phrase bitter on my tongue. As I hovered in orbit over Ignis, new problems surfaced. The main thrusters started to fail. The same erratic power surges spread instability through the ship. My Zeus shook violently. The main consoles blinked off and back on in a flash. I inhaled deeply, steadying myself, and pushed the engines, hoping to break free of the moon's gravitational field. The second I adjusted power controls, a deep, shuddering noise tore through the ship. It was visceral, something you don't just hear but feel. Panic flared, sharp and quick before I forced it down. The sound was coming from the engineering bay. We were losing altitude. Through the cockpit glass, I watched the Ignis barren alien landscape rose to meet us. Beautiful and utterly unforgiving. Just me and my Zeus ES, my companion. Decision was made 2 days ago. Docking at the local repair station wasn't an option. Quick scan would reveal that my cargo hold carried over 2 SCU of hadanite, with even more stowed in ROC mining vehicle. Altogether, it was worth close to 1 million credits. A fortune that could pull me out of debt and keep the creditors off my back. But in Pyro, it was a death sentence. A haul like that would turn me into the glowing target for every low life in the system. I had no choice but to deal with it myself. "It's not a bug, it's a feature," I shouted, adding power into the main thruster, one agonizing increment at a time. The system couldn't handle it. The right thruster failed completely, its familiar hum replaced by suffocating silence. I dropped the remaining engine to 10% power. We were plummeted now, getting sucked in towards the surface of the lifeless moon. I looked up and realized I was seeing sparks, burning particles streaking across the cockpit glass. We were entering the atmosphere. There was no way back. My HUD blared with every alarm it had been programmed to scream. Overspeed, system damage, engines. I silenced them all. My hand gripped the flight controls tightly. The ship wanted to roll right, and I was fighting to keep it steady. The altitude indicator read 10,000 meters. "If I hit the ground like this, I'm done," I muttered, forcing the thought aside. 3,000 meters, computer barked. Instinct took over. My eyes locked onto the valley, a narrow line between 2 mountains, with Dry Lake in the distance. "This is my landing strip," I told myself. My right hand moved to the VTOL controls, the belly thrusters designed for hovering and upright flight. They might burn out, just like the mains did. But I had no choice. 1,000 meters, the voice warned again. I inhaled sharply, tightening the seatbelt. The synthetic voice screamed, "Terrain, terrain, pull up, pull up." "I know, you idiot," I shouted back. "My trust is Zeus," I whispered, pushing VTOLs to 10% power. Still too fast. The thruster came to life, their vibrations barely audible over the chaos. More power to VTOLs. 400 meters. 300. 200. I shoved VTOLs to full power. The world slowed. Red dust and cracked surface rushed towards me. I closed my eyes. When I awoke, Ignis greeted me in its stark, breathtaking beauty. The landscape was overwhelming, terrifying in its stillness. The sun deep behind the mountains, its final rays reflecting off the distant mountain peaks. Time felt frozen. I was here. Ship's seat safety system saved my life. The cockpit around me was battered but intact. Most systems were dead, Only emergency battery-powered life support was on. The onboard computer reported enough charge for 48 hours. 48 hours of oxygen. The communication array was destroyed. Not that there was anyone to call in this desolate place. I forced myself to stand up, moving unsteadily as the reality of the situation sank in. The Zeus was crippled, its internals fried, leaning awkwardly on one side with landing gears still retracted. I needed a plan. Somewhere on this side of the moon was a weather research facility, but I didn't know exactly where. I had to figure that out, and fast. My survival inventory wasn't impressive. 2 oxypens, little water, some food, weapons and PC, a portable solar-powered shelter with a built-in oxygen generator. It wasn't much, and the nearest station was likely weeks away. I'll figure this out, I told myself, my voice barely audible. Sun vanished with a sudden biting chill. Temperature plummeted to -30°C. No traveling at night, I said aloud, as thought speaking the words would make them real. I made my way to the cargo bay to check on the rock. The landing had been rough, but the rock was a hardy machine. A mining rover built to endure the hardest moons in human-colonized space. Like tireless ants, operators piloted these rigs to carve resources out of the distant world. But they weren't meant for long journeys, no protection from the elements, no enclosed cabin. Exhausted, I went into the captain's cabin and slid into the sleeping bag. It was cold outside, but it kept me warm. In space, you had to be prepared. All systems were off, only oxygen in this tiny room. Save the battery. That thought replayed in my mind as the wind howled against the damaged hull. I couldn't stay awake for another minute. The quiet was unsettling. The only sound was the sand brushing against my broken ship, like a whispered reminder of just how alone I truly was. I checked my PDA. The sun would rise in 20 minutes. Almost ready to depart, I ran the last checks and finalized my plan. I had landed, or rather crashed, at the base of a mountain that didn't look too steep. I had to carry my scanner to the top to achieve the best results and maximize coverage. With a press of the button, the cargo ramp groaned and scraped against the leafless red rock as it lowered. The day-night cycle here was short, just 7 hours. I had to be back before dark. My suit could hold 180 minutes of oxygen if I kept a steady pace, and I had 2 rechargeable oxypens with me. Each one could refill the suit's oxygen completely. My gear was simple but essential. A tractor beam device, a med pen, my pistol with a spare magazine, and a scanner that fit snugly in my bag, weighing around 4 kilograms. I wasn't expecting trouble, but in Pyro you never knew. The pistol added a sense of security as well. I started my ascent. At 250 meters, a loud bang echoed through the air. Sunrise. The first light swept across the landscape with a roar, accompanied by powerful winds that kicked up the red dust. My PDA had shown -40°C just minutes ago and only 15 minutes of survival time. Now it was pushing 50°C. The rapid temperature shift was brutal, but my suit was built for extreme hot conditions, designed for the scorching surfaces of Aberdeen and Stanton, light years away from here. The sunrise was both terrifying and magnificent. Alive with light, the stars' rays danced across the condensation forming on my visor. I wiped it clear with a gloved hand, marveling at the view before me. I continued up the hill. It wasn't too steep, but my thoughts weighed me down. Months passed since I've been home. The realization haunted me, stirring memories which I had been trying to hide. I forced myself to stop thinking about my family, about what would happen to my mother if I didn't make it. From this height, I could see my wounded ship at the base of the mountain, its battered hull catching the sun. I had flown the ship for half a decade. At that moment, I made a silent vow. I'm coming back for you. Every credit from the Hadanite in your hold will go to fixing you. You don't deserve this death. You saved my life and I'll return the favor. But a dark thought crept in again. Zorak, that scumbag. If the lack of oxygen didn't kill me, his bounty hunters might. I owed him 2 million credits, and the interest alone was enough to bury me. Focus, I muttered, shaking the thought away. Survival came first, the rest can be dealt with. I reached the top of the ridge by midday, kneeled down, setting up the surface scanner. It emitted a satisfying chime as it synced with my PDA. The scan began, and I found myself consumed by the silence and the beauty of Ignis. Alone and isolated, I reflected on how I'd pushed people away for years. It's easier that way, I whispered to no one. A scanner beeped, indicating low battery, and uploaded its data to my PDA. The result was clear, 420 kilometers to the weather station. I laughed bitterly, a 1,000-year-old Earth joke, here on the mountain of Ignis. My suit warned me. I was down to 10% oxygen. I used an oxypen and carefully stowed it away. Extra weight was my enemy now, so I left the scanner behind. My feet were sore. I approached the Zeus with 30 minutes of daylight remaining. The ramp was open just as I had left it. I looked around. An unsettling feeling crept over me. There's no one here. It's fine, I told myself. There were no tracks around the ship, but with these sandstorms, they would be covered within the minutes. I went in. It was time to start preparing for tomorrow. The opening in the cargo bay was just wide enough for the ROC to squeeze through. I removed light panel from its roof to make it shorter. In the engineering bay, I connected my oxypen and PC shelter to recharge. A fleeting thought crossed my mind. Maybe I could siphon hydrogen from Zeus's tanks to refuel the rock. But the tanks were damaged and the fuel was long gone. Exhausted, I went into the sleeping area. I sealed the door and turned on the oxygen generator to fill the room. Stripping off my suit, I checked the battery. 42% remaining. Something was draining it, likely a damaged system. I shrugged. That would be my last night here anyway. Dinner was cold. Tasteless chicken stroganoff, space MRE. Nutritious and likely the last piece of chicken I'd ever had. Whatever. Suddenly remembering the bottle of whiskey I had stashed away for a special occasion. This qualifies. I smiled and took a deep swing. I slept for a solid 5 hours before suiting up and preparing for the journey ahead. Under the starlit sky, I used my tractor beam to pull the rock free. It sat there beside the Zeus, waiting for a task it was never meant to handle. I packed my supplies carefully. Shelter, sleeping bag, extra ammo for my pistol, sniper rifle, water and food. I spent previous evening crafting a plan. The ROC had enough fuel for 300 kilometers. 2 days of travel at 30 kilometers an hour. After that, it would be 5 grueling days on foot, averaging at 4.5 kilometers per hour. I had 4 MREs, a couple chocolate bars, and a 6.5 liters of water. It was going to be close, but it was doable. Dehydration adventure begins, the way I like it, I joked, then added more seriously, I will make it. I rationed supplies for 1 extra day of travel in case of emergencies, less than a liter of water per day. I stood by the Zeus, one last time resting my hand on its scorched hull. Goodbye, old friend, I said quietly, I'll be back for you. The rock shook and roared to life, its panel lighting up to confirm working systems. A quick diagnostic showed minor damage to the left rear suspension. As the sun rose, it performed another mesmerizing show of dense sand mixed with condensation from rapidly rising temperatures. My suit kept me alive through it all, a barrier between me and the unforgiving world outside. The landscape stretched out in front of me, vast and empty. Vegetation was sparse, just the occasional cluster of bushes or plants resembling a vineyard parched for the entire summer, desperate for rain that would never come. The rock rumbled along, making its usual happy mechanical noises. Wide chunky soft tires absorbed most of the small bumps on the uneven surface. I had to take a detour around a massive crack in the ground, something my scanner hadn't picked up. That was strange, almost as if it hadn't been there yesterday. I stopped at the edge, my body aching after nearly 3 hours of riding. My muscles were stiff and fatigue was creeping in. I replenished my oxygen and took a few sips from my suit's hydration system. The water was warm, but it helped. I looked down into the crack, but couldn't see far. Every meter deeper, the light was swallowed by the darkness. It wasn't just shadow, it was absent. My imagination was playing tricks on me. I had to get a grip. I stepped back. I relieved myself, noticing the dark yellow color. Dehydration was setting in. Without the fancy filtration system found in military survival suits, I had to ration my water. Lucky for me, the air wasn't harmful to the touch, just not something a human could breathe. I pressed on for another 2 hours before finally searching for a place to stay. My marathon for the day was complete. I had even covered a bit more ground than I had originally planned. Camp was nestled beside a large rock, protruding like an iceberg from the valley floor. It felt like the center of this barren expanse. I unpacked my PC, portable solar-powered shelter. It was a standard-issue model for Crusader Special Ops, something civilians couldn't buy. I had paid over 35,000 credits for it. Oleg, a close friend and high-ranking officer in Crusader forces, had connected me with the right person to make it happen. The shelter was an impressive piece of engineering, a rectangular box no longer than a meter, perfectly designed to fit inside of a backpack. With a smooth unfolding mechanism, it expanded into a compact two-person tent, constructed from a secret alloy material that made it both lightweight and durable. Inside, a small plaque near the door displayed its serial number, 23876. Just below it, two buttons stood out. I pressed the green one and held it for 10 seconds. The tent buzzed into life, its door sealing shut with a satisfying whoosh as it vacuumed the air inside of it. Moments later, oxygen began filling the space. 5 minutes passed before the internal system confirmed it was safe to remove my helmet. Batteries could hold for up to 20 hours. The roof of the tent housed a solar panel capable of fully charging the system within an hour, depending on its proximity to the star. Though I didn't fully understand how technology worked, but I'm not an engineer, I just survived, I thought. Surprisingly, I wasn't very thirsty, and the scenery around me was oddly pleasant. A sightseeing route, I chuckled to myself, but the peace didn't last. A sudden loud noise startled me. I jumped, heart racing, only to realize it was the wind picking up speed. The sun was sinking fast, dragging the temperature down with it. I ate a quick dinner and crawled into my sleeping bag, grateful to remove my spacesuit for the night. The shelter felt secure. Its small radius radar system could scan a 25-meter diameter, giving me some peace of mind. My pistol rested close by, just in case. I woke up in the middle of the night, a shiver crawling down my spine like someone was brushing a feather along it. Fear took hold. "Someone is watching me," I whispered into the dark. It was that unmistakable feeling, the one where you're certain someone's eyes are fixed on you, like being stared in a crowded public place. I checked the radar device. The tent was difficult to spot from a distance, but rock wasn't. And if someone was out there, it likely saw the Zeus crash 2 nights ago, its smoking engine lighting up the sky. I waited for 20 minutes, listening carefully and checking the radar. Whatever it was, it remained unseen. Fear kept me inside. I didn't dare face what might be out there. I couldn't afford to dwell on it. Sunrise was 2 hours away. I forced myself to sleep. The unease lingered in the air, curling around me like a shadow I couldn't shake. Alarm on my PDA woke me. I finished the last of yesterday's MRE and took a small measured sip of water. My oxypants and suit were fully charged, ready for the journey ahead. After folding the shelter and securing it back into my bag, I scanned the area for any signs of footprints. Anything that might suggest I hadn't been alone. Nothing. Just the untouched ground, the same as before. The sun had already risen, and the solar panels had done their job. It was time to move. I climbed into ROC and set off. The wind was stronger than before, with gusts carrying sand in chaotic bursts. My thoughts wandered as the vehicle rumbled forward. I imagined myself back on Crusader, sitting in a dimly lit bar with a pint of cold lager, or maybe a citrus IPA like Tarantula, brewed with Hurston-grown tangerines, and Eugenia, the red-haired bartender with a laugh that could stop time. If I make it, I'm asking her out, I told myself. The thought caught me off guard, but I understood why. Her smile was the one thing my mind latched onto at the moment of despair. Fuel was running low. I pulled up my computer and selected the music player. A couple of songs by Brave Accident filled my helmet, the same band I had seen live at the Coliseum on Microtech once. Music has always been my refugee. It helped me think, helped me breathe. From indie rock to wild drum and bass, I let the rhythm match my mood. Right now, I just needed something to keep me steady. A sudden chirp from the radar pulled me out of my daydream. The ROC had picked up a faint signal, a small metallic signature about 4 kilometers northeast. Curious, I decided to take a look. It was along my route anyway, and if I was lucky, I might find some supplies. I set the course and moved out. Roughly 1,000 meters out, I parked the rover near a small hill and climbed it to get a better view. Lying on the ground, I peered through the scope of my rifle. It was a wreck. A missed Fortune, one of the smaller salvage ships. It looked ancient, split in half and half buried in the sand. What was it doing here on Ignis? How long had it been abandoned, left to time and dust? I stared at it for a few more minutes, questions lingering, but I couldn't afford to waste any more time. I climbed down a hill, headed to the crash site. I approached cautiously, pistol drawn. Any wreck was dangerous until you knew what you were dealing with. I walked up to the front section of the vessel, climbing through an opening, while avoiding the sharp metal shards of the shredded hull and exposed piping. I stepped into the cockpit. The pilot sat motionless, slumped against the shattered glass. His helmet was cracked, and inside, a skull stared back at me. A hollow end, frozen in time. Bad way to go, I whispered, shaking my head. A quick search turned up little. A bottle of sweet grape soda in a cup holder, long expired, and nothing else of use. The rear section of the ship was about 50 paces away, lying on its side, as if it had rolled on the impact. There I found a small hydrogen canister, likely meant for salvaging tool. Its nozzle was compatible with the rock, thanks to the standardization of spacecraft parts, a regulation passed in 2351. Repairs and modifications had become far more manageable across different models and manufacturers. It wasn't much, but it would add maybe 50-60 more kilometers to my range. I ran back to the mining rover as dusk crept across the Ignis landscape, trying to put distance between myself and the misfortune. I pressed on. The mountains loomed like sentinels and closed on me in what looked like a dried riverbed. Caves dotted the cliffs on the either side, their dark openings like watchful eyes. Stupid. The sun was about to set. How had I lost the track of time? Oh no, I have to spend the night here. Thought flashed in my head and bounced back off the canyon I was in. I set up the shelter between a large stone and a rover, trying to shield myself from the elements. I felt anxiety pushing on me. Once inside, I locked the door, listening as the shelter filled with oxygen. The winds outside settled down, but something about the silence felt wrong, too still, as thought someone or something was deliberately holding its breath. I forced down half a chocolate bar and a few sips of water. My sleeping bag was made from fur of rare polar quasi-grazer and advanced nanotech materials. No sleeping pad was needed, although the military shelter provided a surprisingly comfortable floor. Exhaustion claimed me, but my sleep was broken. I opened my eyes. It was almost pitch black in the tent. I felt it. Ground was vibrating under me, a slow buzz with tiny intervals. The feeling was unmistakable. Something was under me. My heart was pounding. The radar showed nothing unusual. I was fed up with the fear. I had to regain control. I waited for a couple of seconds and stood up instinctively. I put on my suit, switched on the pistol and went at the tent. The icy air hit me like a wall. Stars painted the sky, illuminating the canyon's outline on canvas on infinite black. I activated night vision on the helmet's visor and edged towards the rock. Temperatures were reaching -40°C. My right shoulder was brushing on the side of the stone barrier. My suit beeped. 19 minutes, 35 seconds of survival time remaining. As I looked up, I froze. It was staring at me. A shapeless figure, tall, a floating shadow with no clear outline, watched me from the other side of the rover. Its gaze felt like it pierced straight through my soul. In that moment I knew I was a prey. It wanted my body, my mind, and something more, my very essence. Then, in the blink of an eye, it was no longer a shadow. It took form, taller than me, standing on 2 feet. Its presence was almost intoxicating. 2 red eyes burned in the darkness. Long braids draped over its shoulder, its face a reptilian, yet eerily intelligent. In one arm it held a glowing staff. A weapon? I couldn't move. It was controlling me, toying with me. I focused. I was here. I could hear my pulse, feel my breath. My mind was mine. Get out. Get out, I shouted in my head. My mind is my own. The creature hesitated, stepping back. For a fleeting second I thought it was confused. Control returned to me. I clicked my pistol settings to maximum power, something I had never done before. The depleted uranium cartridge began charging, vibrating softly in my grip. The creature moved, extending its clawed hand as it lunged. Its right arm shot forward, staff aimed to strike. It knew it was superior. I fired. Round left the barrel, glowing like a tracer, expanding in size as it traveled. It punched through and erupted on impact. This was a round meant to tear through light armor vehicles. I like my toys, asshole, I yelled. The blast ripped into it, tearing away chunks of its shoulder, ribs, something. It shrieked, a sound that shattered the canyon silence and echoed in every direction. Dark internals splattered against the ground, but it wasn't done. It aimed. This wasn't a staff. It was a blaster. A proton charge flew past me, slamming into the mountainside with deafening explosion. It was furious, like a wounded beast lashing out at hunters. Anger surged through me. If it wanted me, it would have to fight for it. I raised my pistol again, its weight steady in my hand, and fired the second shot. This one hit its head. Flesh and bone scattered into the dust. The creature dropped. Silence returned to the canyon. The stars became brighter. I wasn't charged and wasn't afraid. My suit beeped. 18 minutes of survival time remaining. Seek shelter. I retreated to the tent, collapsing inside. Sleep came fast. The adrenaline still coursing through me. I dreamed of gladiators and ancient pits, fighting for survival under the cheers of crowds. Only here, it wasn't romance. It was the galaxy itself, watching, silent witness to my battle. 60 meters outside my tent, I spotted another fracture in the ground. That's how they traveled, underneath. So many questions. I refueled my ROC with a hydrogen canister from the Fortune. There was no sign of the creature's body, just scraps of fabric, a few detached braids, and its blaster. Carefully, I picked it up and stored it inside of the storage compartment. I'm keeping this as a souvenir. Adrian would be interested. Ever since I bought this life-saving shelter from him, we have become good friends. This crazy engineer and collector of rare artifacts scattered across the galaxy. Maybe he could extract some knowledge from it. Something about its technology. Besides, I had another reason to pay him a visit. I planned to take my Zeus to his lab for a few unconventional upgrades. Just needed a coin. This guy liked his payments on time. And I was here, walking away alive. And the most important thing was that I wasn't afraid. That night I calculated my remaining journey. 2 days, 53 kilometers to go. The night was calm. I woke a few times listening to the silence. I still had food and water thanks to the hydrogen canister and the grape soda, which expired 13 years ago. Before leaving the wreck, I had scanned the missed fortune and planned to report it to Stanton authorities. But deep down, I doubt anyone would come for the poor fellow inside. Most likely, no one was looking any longer. Morning started well, but by midday everything changed. A storm front rolled in, bringing fierce winds that howled relentlessly, obscuring the horizon with swirling dust. Walking was difficult. With the sand pelting against my helmet, I passed another plant, wondering if it was still alive, likely a resilient part of the local ecosystem. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were watching me, but they didn't dare. It was time to stop for a quick break. I stretched my back and pulled out my trophy, inspecting it, running my fingers over the strange marking etched along its side. Some kind of writing, but nothing I recognized. I didn't know how to operate it. For now, I needed answers. I pulled up my PDA and searched for anything that might shed light on what I was dealing with. I skimmed through Vandul records, comparing images. These creatures were similar but not the same, almost identical in form, yet larger, more imposing. An Evangel had never been known to possess psychic controlling abilities. Then I found something, an old article briefly mentioning Vadrox, the supposed predecessors of Vandul, a species that had walked the stars long before humanity ever existed, thought to be extinct, lost to time, yet here they were. My PDA's database was limited to pre-downloaded archives. If I wanted real answers, I would need to access space station's terminals and start asking the right questions. I stood up and continued the hike. My muscles ached and my shoulders were sore from carrying the pack with my rifle and Vandal staff strapped to it. I quickened my pace, determined to reach the weather station by tomorrow evening. Tonight would be my last night out here, I hoped. I allowed myself the luxury of full MRE and plenty of water, knowing I still had supplies to spare. Bacon, mac and cheese, warm and filling. The night was loud and unnerving. The windstorm battered my tent, its relentless pounding echoing like distant screams. As I lay in the darkness, I could feel the phantom glow of red eyes boring into me. I drowned in the dream. By midday, I was close. I refilled my oxygen as the radar dishes of the weather station emerged from the haze in the distance. About a kilometer out, I climbed to the higher ground and pulled out my sniper rifle. The 803, a masterpiece by Gemini, was built for precision and power at long range. Its sleek design and flawless ergonomics made it a favorite among marksmen, but what truly set it apart was its ballistic rounds. I settled in, my rifle snug against my shoulder. The familiar weight ground me in. Pressing into position, I peered through the scope, scanning the facility. What I saw in the main courtyard stopped me cold. Two bodies lay sprawled outside of the station, scientists by the look of their uniform. Near them sat an Aurora MR, parked on the landing pad with its door ajar. Sand had blown inside, but the ship looked intact. My chest tightened. The Aurora was my very first ship, a gem from Roberts Space Industries, sold straight off the dealership floor for just under 700,000 credits. 14 years ago, I had leased one, just like it, only mine was a battered second-hand model, once owned by a local delivery service around Lorville, my hometown. It was in awful shape, barely holding together, but it was mine. I put myself through the flight academy and made it happen. Now, here it was, my ticket off this cursed moon. But the dream had turned into a nightmare. Whatever had killed those scientists was still here. I spotted movement in one of the station's shattered windows. It was staring at me, right through my scope. Kilometer away, it felt my presence. I knew what was going to happen next. My hand moved instinctively. I removed the magazine, pulled back the bolt, and pocketed the 5 rounds. From my belt compartment, I took the 5 Devastators, Crusader's finest. I loaded 4 into the mag, chambered 1, and locked the mag back in place. Looking through the scope again, I saw them. 2 figures. They looked exactly like one I shot another night. One of them held the body of a scientist. She was young, maybe in her 30s. Her lifeless form dangling like a broken doll. She was missing her arm. My stomach churned with rage. I hated them. It looked like those monsters killed for sport, entertainment, revenge. There was no Bioticorp around Ignis. Those people were gone, nothing with enough range to save them. I steadied my breathing. I felt like a volcano getting ready to erupt, and I suddenly knew they would be covered by the magma of my hatred. First Devastator hit the entrance and airlock area, obliterating the left side in a glorious explosion. Metal, glass, and red sand molted in one big abstract painting. I was Kandinsky on psychedelics. My brush was my rifle. The second round found its mark, shattering the room with bad drugs in it. The destruction was total. Oleg's birthday gift, the 5 Crusader rounds, had been worth saving for this very moment. One of the shadows leapt from the window and began sprinting east towards opening in the ground. A straight line. Foolish. I fired again. The round detonated just ahead of it, tearing its legs and lower body apart with shrapnel and debris. It was still alive, crawling, but I didn't care. My focus was locked on the weather station. I moved quickly, alternating between a fast walk and a steady jog, pushing forward with purpose. At 50 meters, I switched to my pistol and slowed my pace. Moving cautiously, I tried not to look at the dead scientists outside, but I couldn't help it. The sight was brutal, an agonizing death. The blood was still fresh. I stepped up and entered what remained of the station's left wing. Inside, I found another body, a pilot. His legs were twisted in a natural way, almost as if he had been slammed against the floor with a brute force. Most likely, he was just a delivery guy, bringing supplies to the station. Wrong place, wrong time. I connected to the station's computer and began copying data logs and security records. I looked around. Sunlight streamed through a gaping hole where the window once was, casting a lone shadow across the room. Dust particles swirled lazily in the air, disturbed only by my movement. The space was littered with debris, the fragments of shattered equipment and broken lives, a silent witness to the chaos that had unfolded here. Then I felt it again, the low tremor of the ground beneath me. They were coming. I moved fast, sprinting to the Aurora. Once in the cockpit, I gripped the controls and powered up the ship. Welcome to Rubber Space Industries. Enjoy the ride. The engines bursted to life, and the ship felt as light and nimble as I remembered. As soon as I gained some altitude, I saw them, emerging from the crack, like predators surfacing from the depths. Then, in perfect unison, they raised their weapons. Blinding streaks of energy ripped through the air. Proton charges slammed into the Aurora's shields, erupting in bursts of light. The impact sent a faint tremor through the hull. I didn't hesitate. Flipping the ship's nose down without aiming, I fired 2 Size 1 missiles. They struck just outside of the station, sending debris and fire cascading into the valley. Flames licked the air as I pulled the ship and sped into the distance. Flew low and fast inside of the dried riverbed, heading back to Zeus. Massive boulders bloomed around me. The cracked ground stretched below, while caves arched overhead like gaping mouths. They reminded me of the emptiness of the black hole, endless and consuming. But this place wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with pain and anger. The sun was setting, bathing the landscape in the eerie, alien glow. Motionless, yet hauntingly beautiful. I passed an abandoned rock but didn't dare to stop to retrieve the Hadanite from its hole. There was no time. Night was closing in. After about 25 minutes sprint, the Zeus appeared on my radar. I flipped the engine's banking to the right and came to the stop right in front of the Zeus's ramp. I scanned the area one last time before hopping out. I had to move fast. I ran into the cargo bay and used my tractor beam to grab 2 SCU boxes filled with precious gems. Cockpit was the way I left it. The indicator caught my eye, battery at 6%, quantum fuel 72%. I flipped the switch, computer voice said, fuel storage mode activated. I paused on my way out, glancing back. My gaze fell on a little magnetic bubble toy in the shape of Earth, my good luck charm. It used to belong to my great-grandfather. I grabbed it and moved on. I clicked on my PDA and Zeus made noise raising the ramp. The cargo box was secured under the Aurora. The clamps dug in and locked into position with a satisfying click. I jumped into the cockpit, engaged the engines and boosted up, retracting the landing gear as I ascended. I glanced at the star map and keyed in my destination, P5L2. The course was set to Gaslight Station. Aurora's fuel tank size dictated my next steps, and I obeyed. "So long, Ignis," I whispered, engaging the quantum drive. The aurora jumped into the light speed, and the cursed moon disappeared behind me.